Sometimes a single momenta glance, a pendant. A kind act can change a life forever, turning strangers into family and loss into a second chance. The restaurant glowed with golden light, and the sound of quiet music filled the air. It was the kind of place where every plate looked like art and every guest spoke softly, as if afraid to disturb the elegance around them. Edward Langford sat at a corner table near the window, his back straight, his suit perfectly tailored, his expression calm but distant. He wasn't here for pleasure. He rarely was. People often said that Edward had everything a man could dream of: money, respect, power, but anyone who looked closely could see a shadow behind his gray eyes, something heavy and unspoken. He glanced at his watch. Catherine Beaumont was late, as usual. Edward had known her family for years. The Beaumonts were old money rude when they thought no one important was watching, kind when cameras were near. Catherine was no different. She was a beautiful woman in her mid-30s, confident, well-dressed, and used to getting her way. Edward had agreed to meet her to discuss a potential business partnership, though a part of him already regretted it. He didn't enjoy her company. He only respected the doors her last name could open. 10 minutes later, the doors to the restaurant opened and heads turned. Catherine walked in like she owned the place. Her diamond necklace sparkled under the soft lights, and her perfume reached Edward before she even sat down. "Edward, darling," she said, kissing the air near his cheek. "You're early as always. I swear you must have been born with a calendar in your hand." Edward smiled politely. "And you must have been born without one," he replied softly, which made her laugh, though she didn't realize it wasn't meant as a joke. A young waitress approached, carrying 2 menus. Her name tag read Maria. She couldn't have been more than 22. Her uniform was clean but a little faded, and her shoes were worn. Still, she carried herself with quiet grace, her eyes kind but tired. "Good evening," she said, her voice gentle. "Would you like to start with something to drink?" Catherine didn't even look up. "Sparkling water with lemon, and make sure it's cold. The last time I came here, it was barely chilled." Maria nodded. "Of course, ma'am. And for you, sir?" "Just plain water, thank you," Edward replied. As Maria walked away, Catherine leaned forward. "You know, Edward's service these days is terrible. I don't know what's happened to people. No pride in their work anymore." Edward said nothing. He had learned long ago that arguing with people like Catherine was a waste of energy. When the drinks arrived, Maria placed them carefully on the table. But as she reached across to adjust Catherine's glass, her hand trembled slightly. A single drop of water rolled off the glass and landed on the corner of Catherine's plate. It was barely noticeable, but Catherine froze as if someone had slapped her. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she snapped. "Can't you even hold a glass properly? Do you have any idea how much this dress costs?" Maria's face turned pale. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean you didn't mean," Catherine interrupted. "Of course, you didn't mean it. People like you never mean it. Maybe you should find a job where you can't ruin someone's evening." The room went quiet. A few guests turned to look uncomfortable. Edward watched the scene with a tightening in his chest. He hated public cruelty, especially when the victim had no power to defend herself. Maria stammered another apology, her eyes glistening. She quickly took a napkin and wiped the tiny spot, whispering, "I'm really sorry, ma'am." Catherine waved her hand dismissively. "Just bring me a new plate and try not to spill it this time." Edward's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He knew Catherine well enough to realize that if he spoke up now, she'd only make things worse for the girl. He decided to wait until Maria returned. As Maria turned to leave, something caught Edward's eye. Hanging from her neck, half hidden under her apron, was a small silver pendant. The shape was simpler, 5-pointed star, with a small engraving at the center. For a second, Edward couldn't breathe. His heart gave a strange, hard thump in his chest. He knew that pendant. He had seen it years ago, long before the money, before the suits. Before the cold boardrooms and empty mansions, a flash of memory hit him himself as a young man. Laughing under a tree with a woman who had eyes as warm as summer, Alina, she used to wear a pendant just like that. He had given it to her on her 21st birthday, a promise of love and a future they never got to share. She disappeared soon after, leaving behind only rumors and a heart that had never healed. Edward blinked hard, pulling himself back to the present. It couldn't be the same pendant, could it? But the details were too perfect, the small crack near one point of the star. The tiny engraving he remembered carving himself E and E. Their initials. When Maria returned with the new plate, he studied her face more closely. Her features were gentle, and though she was nervous, there was a kind of strength in the way she moved. Something about her eyes made his throat tighten. For a moment, he wondered if he was imagining things. If grief and memory were playing tricks on him. Catherine took the new plate without a word of thanks. Finally, she muttered. I swear, if I ever ran this place, I'd fire half the staff. Maria smiled politely and stepped back. Is there anything else I can get for you? No, Catherine said sharply. Just stay out of the way. Maria nodded and walked off toward another table. Edward's eyes followed her, still drawn to the silver pendant that shimmered when the light caught it. He felt his heart pounding again. Could this girl be connected to Alina somehow? The thought filled him with both hope and fear. Catherine noticed his distracted look. Edward, are you even listening? He blinked. I'm sorry. What were you saying? I was saying that if we combine my family's influence with your company's reach, we could create an exclusive brand line. Something that screams wealth. Aww. She smiled proudly. We could even use my name Beaumont, by Langford. It has a nice ring, doesn't it? Edward nodded absently, his mind far away. The pendant wouldn't leave his thoughts. He felt as though the universe had just opened a door he didn't know existed anymore. Catherine kept talking about fashion, investments, her plans to host a charity gala. Edward heard none of it. His thoughts drifted to Alina again, to the night she left without explanation. He had searched for her for months, but she had vanished. His family had disapproved of her. She was a maid in his father's estate, poor, kind, full of life. They'd said she wasn't their kind. Maybe that was why she ran. And now, decades later, here was a young woman wearing the same pendant. Working as a waitress in a restaurant, Catherine considered beneath her. When the meal ended, Catherine excused herself to make a phone call. Edward took the chance. He stood and walked quietly to where Maria was refilling glasses near the counter. Miss, he said softly. She turned, startled to see him so close. That pendant you're wearing's beautiful. Where did you get it? Maria touched it gently. Oh, this. It was my mother's, she said. It's all I have of her. She passed away when I was very young. Edward felt his chest tighten. Do you know where she got it? Maria shook her head. No, sir. I've always wondered. There are letters on it, but they're faded. May I? He asked quietly, gesturing toward it. She nodded, and he leaned in just enough to see the engraving. His breath caught. E&E, still there, though faint. Exactly where his hands had once carved it? Thank you, he said softly, stepping back. His face had gone pale. Maria looked worried. Are you all right, sir? Yes, he lied. I just thought I'd seen one like it before. It's very special. Catherine returned at that moment, tapping her phone against her palm. Honestly, Edward, that was the most boring call of my life. Are you ready to go? I have a fitting to get to, he forced a smile. Of course, before leaving, Edward pulled out his wallet and slipped a folded note under the empty glass on the table. Alongside it, he placed one of his business cards. Maria came back a moment later to clear the table and froze when she saw the tippet was more than she made in a week. She looked toward the door, but Edward and Catherine were already gone. She picked up the card and read the name. Edward Langford, Langford Holdings. She frowned slightly, unsure why such a powerful man would care enough to leave his number outside. As Edward's car pulled away, Catherine chattered about her designer. Edward barely heard her. His mind was miles away, replaying the glimpse of that pendant over and over. It had been more than 20 years since Alina vanished. But in that single moment, Edward felt as if time had folded back on itself. The girl with the pendant wasn't just another stranger in his world of polished surfaces and shallow conversations. No, there was something about her, something he couldn't ignore. And as the city lights blurred past the car windows, Edward Langford, the man who believed he had lost everything, began to suspect that fate had just placed the biggest secret of his life right in front of him. The next morning, Edward Langford sat in his office, staring out of the tall glass windows that overlooked the city. The view was beautiful, but his mind wasn't there. He couldn't stop thinking about the waitress from the restaurant, the young woman with the silver pendant. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it again glinting under the light. The little engraving he had carved with his own hands so many years ago. It had been a gift to Alina, the woman who once meant everything to him. Now, that same pendant was hanging around a stranger's neck. He couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't a coincidence. There was something in that girl's face, a softness around her eyes, something familiar. It was haunting him. Edward had met thousands of people in his life, politicians, actors, powerful investors, but none had left such an impression in such a short time. This wasn't just curiosity. It felt personal. He leaned back in his chair, pressing his fingers to his temples. Catherine Beaumont's voice still echoed in his mind from the night before, loud and cruel, scolding that poor girl as if she were less than human. Edward had seen arrogance before. The way Catherine had spoken to Maria, it had stirred something inside him, something protective. And then that pendant. It was as if fate had deliberately placed him there to see it. Later that afternoon, Catherine called him. "Edward," she said, her tone light and playful, "I hope you've recovered from last night." "You seemed a bit distracted." "I was just tired," he said calmly. "Tired. Or bored," she teased. "Anyway, I've spoken to my father. He's very interested in our partnership idea. We should meet again soon, maybe over dinner at my place this time. Less noise, better company." Edward sighed quietly. "We'll talk later, Catherine." He ended the call before she could continue. He didn't want to hear her voice anymore. Her attitude toward people who worked hard for a living had disgusted him. He couldn't believe he had once admired her confidence. Now all he saw was vanity and emptiness. He stood and walked to the window again. His reflection stared back at him, an older man with sharp features and tired eyes. He had spent his life building wealth, controlling companies, and expanding his empire. But none of that filled the quiet emptiness that had followed him since Alina disappeared. She had left a hole no success could fill. That evening, after several hours of restless pacing, Edward made a decision. He would find out who the waitress was. Not just her name, but everything, where she came from, who her parents were, how she ended up working at that restaurant. He needed to know. He called his assistant Daniel, a reliable man who had been with him for years. "Daniel," he said, "I need you to find information on a young woman named Maria who works at La Belle Maison restaurant. Quietly. I don't want her or anyone else to know you're looking." Daniel hesitated. "Of course, sir. May I ask why?" Edward paused. "Just a personal matter. Let me know what you find as soon as possible." The next few days dragged by. Edward tried to focus on his work, but his mind wandered again and again to the same moment in that restaurant, the way Maria had nervously apologized. The sadness in her eyes, the pendant resting against her chest. He hadn't felt this kind of curiosity in decades. It was mixed with something else, to fear. Fear of what he might discover. On the third morning, Daniel walked into his office holding a thin folder. "I found some details, sir," he said quietly. "Her name is Maria Ruiz, 22 years old. Born and raised in the city. Her mother was Alina Ruiz." Edward froze. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "Elena Ruiz," he repeated softly, barely breathing the name. "Yes, sir," Daniel continued. "According to public records, her mother passed away when Maria was a child. There isn't much information about her father. He's not listed anywhere. Maria was placed in foster care for a few years, then worked her way through school. She's been working at the restaurant for almost 2 years now." Edward sat down slowly, his heart racing. "Do you have a photo of her mother?" Daniel hesitated before pulling out an old scanned picture from the file. It was grainy, faded with age, but the moment Edward saw it, his hands began to tremble. It was her, Alina, Her smile, her eyes, it was exactly how he remembered her. His voice caught in his throat. "Thank you, Daniel. You can leave it with me," he said quietly. When Daniel left, Edward stared at the photo for a long time. Alina Ruiz, the woman he had loved in secret all those years ago. The woman his family had forced him to forget. He remembered their last night together, how she had cried, how she'd said she couldn't stay because his father would never accept her. He had promised to find her, but when he tried, she had already disappeared. Now, more than 20 years later, her daughter was alive. Working as a waitress in the same city, he suddenly realized something that made his chest ache. Maria wasn't just anyone. She was his daughter. Edward leaned forward, his head in his hands. A flood of memories came rushing back: the laughter, the long walks, the promise that he would always protect Alina. He had failed her. He had failed them both. He knew he couldn't tell Maria immediately. It would sound unbelievable, even suspicious. She didn't know who he was. To her, he was just another rich man who had left a big tip. If he wanted to make things right, he needed to go slowly. That afternoon, he picked up his phone and dialed her number. She answered nervously. "Hello? Maria, this is Edward Langford," he said in his calm, deep voice. "We met the other night at the restaurant." "Sir." "I remember," she replied quickly, a bit unsure. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, of course," he said gently. "I wanted to thank you again for your patience that evening. And I was wondering, would you be interested in meeting me for lunch? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." She hesitated. "Lunch? With you?" "Yes," he said kindly. "It's nothing formal. I just think you might find it worth your time." There was silence on the line. Then she agreed softly. "All right, sir. I can meet you tomorrow." When she hung up, Edward exhaled slowly. He felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. He hadn't felt this alive in years. The next day, they met at a small cafe away from the fancy parts of the city. Edward had chosen it on purpose, quiet, warm, and ordinary. When Maria walked in, she looked nervous, but composed. She wore a simple blue dress and the same pendant, now shining in the sunlight. "Thank you for coming," Edward said as he stood to greet her. "Of course," she said, sitting down. "I was surprised to get your call." "I imagine you were," he said with a smile. "I just wanted to know more about you. You see, I used to know someone who had a pendant exactly like yours. It brought back memories I thought I had lost." Maria looked down, touching the pendant again. "It belonged to my mother," she said softly. "She never told me much about her life. I only know her name was Alina. She worked for a rich family before I was born, but she didn't like to talk about it." Edward's heart pounded. Did she ever mention who they were? Maria shook her head. "No, just that she left suddenly. She said they treated her badly and that she never wanted to go back." He could feel guilt pressing down on him like a weight. His family had ruined her life. "Your mother sounds like a strong woman," he said gently. "She was," Maria smiled faintly. "Even though I didn't have her for long, I still remember how kind she was. Every night before I went to sleep, she'd touch my pendant and tell me it would keep me safe." Edward's eyes grew wet. He looked down at his cup, afraid she might see the emotion in his face. They talked for over an hour. Edward asked questions carefully, trying not to seem intrusive. Maria told him about growing up in foster care, working part-time jobs, and saving for college. She was bright, determined, humble. Every word made him prouder and more ashamed at the same time. When lunch ended, Edward smiled warmly. "Maria, you have a good heart. You remind me of someone I once knew a long time ago." She smiled back shyly. "Thank you, sir. You're very kind." After she left, Edward sat there for a long time. He already knew in his heart that she was his daughter, but he wanted proof not for himself, but for her. He needed to make sure before he told her anything. That evening, made another quiet phone call to a private doctor he trusted completely. "I need a DNA test done discreetly," he said. "I'll send you the details. No one must know about this yet." When he hung up, he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. For the first time in 20 years, Edward Langford felt something new rising in his chest. Not just guilt, but hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to set things right. Edward Langford couldn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the image of Maria's face floating in his mind again and again. Every little detail, the way she smiled shyly, the way she spoke gently about her mother, felt like echoes of the past. The resemblance to Elena was stronger than ever now. The curve of her jaw, the way she tilted her head when she listened. Even her quiet strength, it was all Elena. He turned onto his side and sighed heavily. It was too much to ignore anymore. Deep down, he already knew the truth. But a small part of him still needed proof, something official, something that left no room for doubt. The DNA test would give him that. Still waiting for it made his heart restless. For the next few days, Edward tried to go about his normal routine, but nothing felt normal. In meetings, he found himself zoning out, staring at numbers without really seeing them. His employees noticed how distracted he was, though none dared to ask. Even Catherine Beaumont's name flashing on his phone made him feel irritated. He ignored her calls, not caring how she would react. For the first time in years, business wasn't the most important thing in his life. He kept thinking about how much Maria had suffered without knowing the truth. Growing up without parents, struggling through life while he had lived in luxury, tore him apart inside. He had so much, and she had so little. And the worst part was that he had no idea she even existed until now. If he had known Elena was pregnant back then, nothing would have stopped him from finding her. But his father had controlled everything at that time, even the people Edward was allowed to love. One afternoon, his assistant Daniel entered his office. "Sir," he said carefully, "you have a lunch appointment with Mr. Cole in an hour." Edward looked up from his desk. "Cancel it." Daniel blinked. "Cancel, sir." "Yes. Reschedule for next week." "Understood," Daniel said, though his tone carried surprise. Edward Langford never canceled business lunches, especially not with important investors. When Daniel left, Edward pulled out his phone. His fingers hovered over Maria's number for a moment before he finally pressed call. She answered softly. "Hello?" "Maria," he said, his voice calm but warm. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, sir." "Is everything okay?" "I was wondering," he said, "if you'd like to join me again for lunch tomorrow." "I enjoyed our conversation last time." There was a pause, then she said, "Sure, I'd like that." This time, Edward chose a quiet restaurant by the park. It wasn't fancy, but it was peaceful, filled with sunlight and soft music. He arrived early and waited, watching people walk by outside. Families, couples, children all, living lives that seemed ordinary but full of connection. It made him wonder what kind of life he could have had if Elena had stayed. When Maria walked in, his face lit up. She looked more comfortable this time, her nervousness replaced with curiosity. "Good afternoon, Mr. Langford," she said, smiling. "Please," he replied kindly, "call me Edward." She laughed a little. "That feels strange? Well, you're kind of a big deal." "I'm just a man, Maria," he said softly. "Titles and money don't make us better than others." She nodded thoughtfully. "That's not something I hear often," they ordered. He asked her about her studies, her dreams, and her daily life. She told him she wanted to go back to college but couldn't afford the fees yet. She had been saving every tip, every extra shift. Her goal was to study social work so she could help kids who grew up the way she did. Edward felt both pride and sorrow swelling inside him. "You have a kind heart," he said. "The world needs more people like you." Maria smiled shyly. "Thank you. My mother used to say the same thing. She always told me, be kind, even when the world isn't." Edward's throat tightened. He could almost hear Elena saying those words. They talked for hours. And Edward found himself telling stories about his youth, about mistakes he made and lessons he learned. He didn't mention Elena yet, but he hinted at someone from his past. Maria listened intently, her eyes full of empathy. When lunch ended, Edward walked her out. "Maria," he said before she left, "I want you to know that you can call me any time. For anything." She looked at him, surprised by his tone. "That's very kind of you, sir." I don't know why you're being so generous, but thank you. Edward smiled faintly. Sometimes life gives us second chances. I've learned not to ignore them. After she left, he sat alone for a long time, thinking about how much he wanted to tell her the truth. But he needed the DNA test first. He couldn't risk shattering her trust by saying something that might sound impossible. A few days later, the results arrived in a sealed envelope. Edward stared at it for several minutes before opening it. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the paper. There it was, in black and white, 99.9% probability. She was his daughter. He read it again, just to make sure his eyes weren't deceiving him. Then he leaned back in his chair and let out a long, shaky breath. The world seemed to blur for a moment. He felt tears welling up, but he didn't wipe them away. He had spent years hiding emotions behind cold composure, but this time he didn't care. He finally knew the truth. Maria was his blood. His child. That night, Edward sat in his study with a glass of whiskey. Staring at an old photo of himself and Alina, he remembered the first day they met. She was cleaning the garden. Humming softly, sunlight touching her face. He had been drawn to her kindness from the start. And now, that same kindness lived in Maria. He whispered softly, "I found her, Alina. I found our daughter." The next morning, he called Maria again. "Would you like to meet me for a walk in the park today?" "I have something important to tell you." She agreed, and they met under a row of trees near a quiet lake. The air was crisp, and autumn leaves floated down from the branches. Edward took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Maria," he began, "I want to tell you something about your mother." She looked surprised. "You knew her?" "Yes," he said softly. "A long time ago. She worked for my family. We were close. She was the most wonderful person I ever met." Maria's eyes widened. "You knew her? Really?" He nodded slowly. "When she left, I searched for her. But she disappeared. I never knew she had a child." She stared at him, trying to process his words. "You mean me?" He hesitated, his throat dry. "Yes, Maria, I believe. I believe I'm your father." Maria's face went pale. She blinked several times, unsure if she had heard correctly. "You're saying you're my father?" Edward nodded again, his eyes filled with tears. "I know it's hard to believe. I didn't know about you. If I had, I would have been there for you. I would have never let you grow up alone." Maria stepped back slightly, confusion and shock flooding her face. This is too much. How do you even know?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the DNA results. "I didn't want to say anything until I was sure," he said quietly. "But now I am. The test confirms it." She stared at the paper, her hands trembling. 1,000 emotions rushed through her: anger, disbelief, sadness, curiosity. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "All my life, I wondered who my father was. And now, suddenly you're telling me it's you, a billionaire?" Edward's voice softened. "I understand how strange this must feel. You don't have to believe me right now. You don't even have to accept me. But please know, Maria, that I'm telling you the truth. I loved your mother. Losing her was the biggest regret of my life. Finding you feels like getting a part of her back." Maria didn't speak. She just looked at the lake, her eyes full of tears she didn't want to let fall. After a long silence, she said, "I need time." Edward nodded, his own voice trembling. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here whenever you're ready." She turned to leave, but then stopped. "Did you ever really love her?" "With all my heart," he said without hesitation. Maria nodded slowly and walked away, leaving him standing under the trees, his heart aching with both hope and sorrow as he watched her disappear down the path. Edward felt something deep inside him change. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about money, deals, or power. All he cared about was earning his daughter's trust, and maybe, in doing so, finding forgiveness for the years he could never get back. The city's streets buzzed with gossip, and the elite circles were talking about nothing else. Catherine Beaumont had been exposed in a scandal that no one could ignore. Reports circulated that she had misused charity funds for her personal benefit, manipulating numbers and falsifying documents to maintain her luxurious lifestyle. Newspapers, television, and social media were filled with stories of her arrogance, greed, and entitlement. Edward Langford watched it all unfold from his office, his expression calm but thoughtful. Unlike Catherine, he had no interest in exploiting the situation for personal gain. He only felt a quiet sense of justice. It started innocently enough. The same restaurant where he had first noticed Maria became the center of attention for journalists, trying to get a reaction from the Beaumont family. Catherine, oblivious to the consequences of her actions, walked in one afternoon as if nothing had changed. She wore the same expensive designer dress and sparkling jewels, projecting confidence. But the whispers followed her like shadows. Guests murmured, staff exchanged glances, and Edward, who happened to be at a nearby table for a meeting, watched everything unfold silently. Catherine strutted toward the manager, complaining loudly about the quality of the service. "Honestly, the food here is unacceptable. How do you expect me to dine in peace when everything is so mediocre?" she snapped. The young staff, including Maria, who was working that day, exchanged nervous glances. Maria's hands shook slightly as she carried plates across the room, remembering their last encounter. She felt a mixture of fear and resolve. She wouldn't allow herself to be intimidated like before. Not now that she had begun to believe there was hope in her life. Edward's eyes followed Maria as she moved gracefully through the dining area, keeping her composure despite Catherine's presence. When Catherine saw her, a smirk formed on her face. Well, look who's here," she said, loud enough for the other guests to hear. "The little waitress I humiliated last week. Still wearing that same pathetic pendant, I see. Are you still dreaming that anyone cares about your life?" The room fell silent. Maria froze, gripping a tray tightly in her hands. The pendant she wore glimmered faintly, catching Edward's attention immediately. He rose from his chair, his tall frame commanding attention. "Catherine," he said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "Enough." Catherine laughed, a sharp mocking sound. "Oh, Edward, you always take people's sides. Why do you even care about this girl? She's nothing." Edward's gaze fixed on her, unyielding. "She is everything, and you should apologize." His tone left no room for argument. Catherine's smirk faltered for a moment, replaced by a flash of irritation. "Apologize? I don't apologize to anyone. I am who I am, and people should accept it." Edward stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough for those nearby to hear. "You are about to learn that actions have consequences. This isn't just about me or you, Catherine. It's about integrity, respect, and the truth that people like Maria deserve to hear." Her face flushed, and she glared at him. "Do you think you can intimidate me?" "You can't. I'm not intimidating you," Edward said firmly. "I'm stating a fact. Your behavior is unacceptable, and your actions are being noticed by more people than you realize. There are consequences for cruelty, especially when it's public. And believe me, the truth always comes to light." Catherine's hand trembled slightly, but she tried to maintain her composure. "You think you can ruin me, Edward? You're a fool if you believe that." Edward didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. He held it up slightly, letting Catherine's eyes catch it. "Catherine, the authorities are already aware of your fraudulent activities. I suggest you cooperate rather than continue this humiliation. Your reputation is in your hands." The room was silent, filled with tension. Guests held their breath, some whispering among themselves. Maria's eyes widened in disbelief. She couldn't believe this was happening. The same woman who had made her feel worthless was now being confronted, publicly, by the man who had shown her kindness. Catherine's expression changed, shifting from arrogance to shock and then to anger. "How dare you? You have no right," she shouted, her voice shaking. Edward's tone remained calm, unwavering. "I have every right to speak the truth. And you, Catherine, need to understand that privilege does not protect you from accountability. What you've done will be judged, and it starts with acknowledging the harm you've caused." Maria watched silently, feeling a strange sense of relief and empowerment. She had witnessed this type of behavior before, countless times, and it had always left her feeling small. But now, with Edward standing up not only for her, but for justice itself, she felt something shift inside her. She realized that courage wasn't about fighting with anger, but standing firm in truth. Catherine's eyes darted around the room. People were staring now, some whispering, others taking out phones to capture the scene. The pressure mounted, and she realized that her usual tactics of intimidation no longer worked. Edward's calm authority overshadowed her bluster. "You'll regret this," she spat, trying to regain control. Perhaps Edward replied quietly, "But not as much as you'll regret ignoring the truth." At that moment, Maria felt a strange sense of pride. The woman who had humiliated her was finally facing consequences. It wasn't revenge, it was recognition that no one had the right to treat others as less than human. She realized that Edward's presence had changed everything. It wasn't just about him or Catherine, it was about fairness, dignity, and the realization that some people could make a difference. Catherine finally stormed out, leaving behind whispers, stares, and the lingering echo of humiliation. The manager approached Maria quietly. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern in his voice. Maria nodded, still holding her tray. "I think so," she said softly. She glanced toward Edward, who had returned to his table, sitting quietly, his eyes observing the room. Their silent connection spoke volumes. She felt safe, seen, and respected in a way she had never felt before. After the crowd dispersed, Edward stood and walked toward her. "Maria," he said gently, "you handled that very well." Maria looked up, a mixture of relief and gratitude on her face. "Thank you, Edward," she whispered. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "Just remember this, your worth is not measured by how others treat you. You are more than enough, and you always have been." Maria felt tears prick her eyes. She had grown up learning to hide her pain, to smile through humiliation, to survive without support. But in that moment, she felt a sense of validation and hope that she had never experienced. For the first time, someone she respected and admired had recognized her true value. Edward placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "And remember, Maria, there's more to your life than anyone can take from you. The past doesn't define you, it's how you rise that matters." Maria nodded, feeling a new strength building inside her. She realized that her life was about to change, and that she had someone in her corner who truly cared. As Edward walked away, she clutched the pendant around her neck, feeling its weight not as a burden, but as a symbol of connection, hope, and the possibility of a future she had never imagined. Later that evening, Edward reflected on the day. Catherine's arrogance had crumbled, but that wasn't the real victory. The real change was in Maria. She had seen courage and kindness in action, and Edward knew that this was only the beginning. He had found his daughter, and now he had the chance to help guide her, protect her, and finally make amends for the years lost. In the quiet of his office, Edward smiled faintly, realizing that some battles weren't fought with money or power, they were fought with integrity, patience, and the courage to stand up for what was right. And today, Maria had seen all three. He looked at the city lights twinkling below, thinking of how life could change in unexpected ways. A girl with a silver pendant had walked into his world and reminded him of everything he had lost and everything he had yet to gain. The past could not be changed, but the future, he realized, was just beginning, and for the first time in many years, Edward Langford felt hope not just for himself, but for the daughter he had finally found and the life they might build together. The DNA results lay on Edward Langford's desk, and he stared at them for a long moment, unable to believe what they revealed. Maria was his daughter. The words on the page were clear, scientific, undeniable. Yet despite this certainty, a whirlwind of emotions flooded him: joy, guilt, relief, and fear. He had spent decades mourning the woman he loved, Alina. And now the daughter he had never known was alive, working hard in a city full of people who had no idea of her worth. For the first time in years, Edward felt a mixture of hope and responsibility. He didn't waste time. He arranged another meeting with Maria, choosing a quiet, private location where they could talk without interruptions. When she arrived, she was nervous but curious, sensing from his demeanor that something serious awaited. Edward stood to greet her, smiling softly. "Maria," he said, "thank you for coming." She returned his smile hesitantly. "I wasn't sure if I should, but you sounded important." Edward gestured to a bench under a large oak tree near a small lake. The late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, casting golden light over the water. "Please have a seat. I want to talk to you about something very important." As they sat, Edward took a deep breath, trying to steady his voice. "Maria, I need to tell you the truth about your mother and about you." Maria's eyes widened slightly. "My mother? What about her?" Edward leaned forward, his expression gentle but serious. "Her name was Alina Ruiz. She was someone I loved very much many years ago. We were together, and when she left, I thought I had lost her forever." Maria's breath caught. "You knew her?" "Yes," Edward said softly. "I knew her better than anyone. And I want you to know that she loved you, even though circumstances kept us apart." Maria's hands trembled as she reached for the pendant around her neck. "She gave me this." Edward nodded. "She wanted to protect you. That pendant is more than jewelry. It's a connection to her and now to me as well." Maria's voice was barely audible. You knew about me." Edward's eyes filled with tears, and he looked down briefly before meeting hers again. "No, I didn't know you existed until recently. But I believe you are my daughter." For a long moment, Maria was silent. Her mind raced, trying to process the reality in front of her. The man who had left a tip at the restaurant, the man who had recognized her pendant, the man who had defended her against Catherine Beaumont was all connected. Could this man really be her father? Edward reached into his pocket and produced the DNA test results. "I wanted to be certain before I told you anything. The test confirms it. You are my daughter, Maria." Maria's eyes widened, and tears started to form. She gripped the pendant tightly, feeling the weight of her mother's past and the sudden presence of her father's truth. I don't know what to say," she whispered. It's too much." Edward reached out gently, placing a hand over hers. "You don't have to say anything. You don't have to accept it right away. I understand that this is overwhelming." Shh. She looked at him, searching his eyes for honesty. "Why now? Why are you telling me this after all these years?" Edward's voice was filled with emotion. "Because I couldn't wait any longer. I had to know the truth, and now I want you to know it too. I want to make things right, Maria. I want to be here for you if you'll let me." Maria's mind spun with conflicting emotions. She had grown up without a father, learned to rely only on herself, and built a life from her own hard work. And now, suddenly, this man was standing in front of her, claiming to be her father. Could she trust him? Did she even want to? Yet there was something in his eyes, a sincerity she couldn't ignore. She took a deep breath and nodded slowly. I need time," she said quietly. Edward smiled gently, understanding. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here whenever you're ready." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun begin to set over the water. The air was calm, filled with the gentle rustle of leaves and distant sounds of children playing. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions both of them felt inside. Finally, Maria spoke again. "Did you really love her?" "With all my heart," Edward replied without hesitation. "And losing her was the greatest regret of my life. Finding you, meeting you, feels like a second chance." Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know how to feel: anger, confusion, hope, or relief, but all at once. She felt a connection she had never imagined. This man, this stranger who had suddenly become her father, had changed her life in ways she couldn't yet understand. Over the next few days, Edward and Maria continued to meet in quiet, neutral places. He shared stories about Alina, about his life, and about the hopes he had carried for her mother, and now for her. He didn't pressure her, and he didn't demand love or trust. He simply offered his presence, his honesty, and his willingness to make up for lost time. Maria began to open up gradually, telling him about her struggles, her dreams, and her fears. She spoke of the challenges she had faced in foster care, the job she had worked to save money for college, and her desire to help others like herself. Edward listened, feeling a mixture of pride and guilt. He was proud of the young woman she had become, yet guilty for not being there when she needed him most. One afternoon, after a long conversation, Maria removed the pendant from her neck and held it out to Edward. "This belongs to you too," she said softly. Edward's hands trembled as he took it. He held it close to his chest, feeling the connection to Alina, to Maria, and to the past that had finally been reconciled. "Thank you," he whispered. "I promise to protect Itand, to protect you." From that day forward, their relationship began to grow slowly. Edward helped Maria with her education, providing resources she had never imagined having. He introduced her to opportunities, mentors, and experiences that opened new doors in her life. Yet he always allowed her to maintain her independence, knowing that her strength and resilience had shaped her into who she was. Meanwhile, Catherine Beaumont's downfall continued. Edward did not seek revenge, but he did make sure justice was served. He supported Maria in establishing a scholarship fund for underprivileged students, naming it after Alina Ruiz. The initiative gained attention, highlighting the contrast between Catherine's greed and the genuine care that Edward and Maria shared for others. As the weeks turned into months, Edward and Maria grew closer. They shared laughter, memories of Alina, and stories of the past that connected them. Edward marveled at how much she reminded him of Elaine, just in appearance, but in kindness, intelligence, and strength. And Maria began to understand that the father she had never known was real, and that he was committed to being a part of her life. One evening, as they walked through a quiet garden at Edward's estate, Maria looked around at the trees, flowers, and gentle lights. "I never imagined my life could be like this," she said softly. Edward smiled, taking her hand gently. "Neither did I," he replied. "But sometimes life surprises us. It gives us a second chance, and we have to take it." Maria nodded, feeling a warmth she had never known before. She realized that the pendant, once a symbol of loss, had become a symbol of connection, love, and hope. The past could not be changed, but the future was theirs to build together. Edward looked at his daughter and felt a peace he had not known in decades. The years of regret, the endless searching, and the pain of losing Alina had all led to this moment. And now, as he walked beside Maria, he knew that he had a chance to make up for the past and create a new beginning for both of them. In the quiet of the evening, as the stars began to appear in the sky, Edward and Maria walked side by side, the pendant shining softly against her chest. It was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a promise, a bridge between the past and the future, and a reminder that even after years of loss and separation, love could still find its way home. For Edward Langford, the billionaire who had once watched silently as the world treated others unfairly, life had changed in the most profound way. He had found the daughter he never knew existed, reconnected with the memory of the woman he had loved, and discovered that true wealth was not in money, but in family, trust, and the chance to start again. And for Maria, the young woman who had once been a timid waitress with nothing but a pendant to connect her to her past, the world had opened in ways she never imagined. She had found her father, reclaimed a part of her mother, and stepped into a future filled with hope, love, and the possibility of dreams finally coming true together. They walked toward the light of a new beginning, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. The past had shaped them, but it no longer defined them. Their story was just beginning.